Hello and welcome to the Ramblings of a 42-Year-Old Man. Chris Smith here with you again, and we're going to return to our Final Fantasy series today. I'm going to ramble about Final Fantasy III, the next game in the mainline series. After our quick departure last week with the Game Boy Final Fantasy games, we're going to return to the mainline series. So again, today we'll be talking Final Fantasy III, another one of those games that was not released into the US. Please enjoy the show. So in 1990, Square releases Final Fantasy III on the Famicom system in Japan, which is their version of the NES that we had here in the States. Now, this point, the 1990s is actually the year the very first Final Fantasy game was released in the US. And so at this point, I believe this one actually came out before the US version of Final Fantasy I. And so by the time this game came out, and they would have had time to do any sort of localizing or getting it ready to come out to the US, they were already moving up into the Super Nintendo system. And so they wanted to, for the next game in the US, just jump all the way out to Final Fantasy IV, which was the newest one that was going to be coming on the NES, rather than bring 3 over for the Nintendo system, which at that point was about to become an obsolete system. So it was not released in the US until 2006, making it the longest wait that we had for one of these Final Fantasy games to get a US release. So, and when it was released, it was not released in the original form by any means, which Final Fantasy II also was released in kind of a remastered form. But what they did for this one is they completely remade it into like a 3D style game. So the true 2D style of the game we did not get to see until 2021 with the most recent pixel remaster that has been kind of coming out as they're going through the series with these pixel remasters. Final Fantasy III, this is the first time we've seen it in 2D and not the 3D remake. So kind of excited to have that. I'll be honest, I don't particularly like the 3D aesthetic that they use for the remake, so I actually enjoyed the pixel version. I never actually completely played the 3D version, so I played it really for the first time all the way through with this pixel remaster version. So going back to release, 1990, released in Japan, not coming over to the US. So again, director is Hironobu Sakaguchi. Music again done by Nobuo Uematsu. Just like Final Fantasy I, just like Final Fantasy II. Those two will be together for quite a bit of time. So again, not brought to shores in this form. When it was in the remake version, the most recent pixel remaster in 2021, first time we've seen it in 2D. It will also be out on that pixel remaster collection that is coming out on the Switch and PS4 sometime this year. So that is kind of a little bit of the background of the game. We'll go into our next section on the gameplay of the game. Final Fantasy III, just like the predecessor Final Fantasy II, left the narrative links to Final Fantasy I and II behind. It was not a continuation of either of those stories. Again, just kind of a continuation of that style of play, that system. A lot of the classes will look familiar, things like that. So a lot of the aesthetics of the games are the same, but the narrative choices are always separate each time. So in this one, you start off as 4 characters. They're 4 orphans from this little village. And there are no classes at this point. You are what's called an Onion Knight, which is pretty much just your base character class. And the way that Final Fantasy III works versus Final Fantasy II and Final Fantasy I, Final Fantasy I was kind of similar to this a little bit. You had your choice at the very beginning of that game of who you want to be, a warrior, a thief, a monk, any one of the mages. In this one, you've got 4 starting characters, all Onion Knights, and as you progress the game, you'll unlock different jobs that they can choose to do. So you could choose to be, 4 fighters for one part of the game and then change them all to 4 mages the next part of the game, or mix and match them however you want to do. But you have always these 4 characters, and you'll just bring in and out the jobs as you want them. So again, Final Fantasy II was kind of a departure from Final Fantasy I with the leveling system. There was no real true experience points. It was all about how you used your weapons and stuff. That got left behind. That carried over into some of the Game Boy games we talked about last week. This returns you to the experience system. You're fighting battles, you're earning experience points, you're going up in levels, you're getting stronger. And along with these jobs that you can take over and become, as you are using that job, you will gain job points, and you'll go up in levels on that job just like you would your character levels. Both of them go up to 99. Honestly, I don't see a huge amount of difference as you're progressing up the character levels. It doesn't seem like you get to be a better knight as your character level progressive. I would say maybe with some of the mages, maybe you have more magic spells and stuff, but really it doesn't seem to hurt you if you're playing around with your job system. I think they want you to. They want you to play around, play with different kinds of jobs here, different kind of jobs there, and not necessarily worry about how high you get the levels on those specific jobs. Unless you're an achievement hound, and then you got an achievement at the end of the Pixel Remaster where if you get one of those jobs up to level 99, you get a trophy, and yeah, I did that. So similar to 1 and 2, you got your map exploration, you got your random battles, you get into battle, you got your characters lined up on one side, your baddies lined up on the other, you make all your decisions on the bottom area, and you go through. Magic returns, just like the last ones, again, they are purchasable or findable in treasure chests, and then your characters can learn. What's kind of nice with this one is you can learn, you can also unlearn. So if you're playing as a white mage and you learned all the white mage magic, and then you decide, you know what, I want to make this character into a fighter, you can unlearn those white mage spells and go put them on different characters if that's your choice. So it's kind of nice. You can learn and unlearn as you go. And then when it comes to, like, when we talked about the experience system, we talked about battles, bosses, you got villages and dungeons you go into, you got airships and water ships and things like that as well. So very much gameplay similar to the 2 predecessors. So on our next section, we'll jump into some of the story, and we'll kind of split up as we go throughout different parts of the story going forward. Again, not a giant game, still from the Nintendo systems back in the 90s. Those games are a little bit smaller, so we'll probably be able to cover most of the plot without going too long. So please join me for the story part next time. So we open up with our 4 characters, again, orphans from the city of They are exploring in a cave nearby the town, and they fall down into a hole. While they're down there, they find a crystal. This crystal whispers to them that he's choosing them to be the 4 warriors of light, and it grants them some of its power, which in this case translates to job systems or classes. So you can start off the game with the wind crystal is the first one that you find, and the jobs that you get are warrior, monk, white, black, and red mage. Very similar to what you start off with in Final Fantasy 1, minus the thief class that we'll end up finding later on in the game. So they are told this, they get these jobs, they go back to their elder of the village, and he's like, oh, I now that you're the warriors of light, I have this task is before you, please, go and do your adventure. So first stop you have is another city kind of down near just below the one that you're from. You go in there and you find that all the citizens are ghosts for some reason. You go to a nearby castle, all the citizens in there are ghosts too. You find out that they've been cursed by a djinn. And the princess of the castle, Sarah, has a ring that can break the curse. And she has gone to the sealed cave to try to battle the djinn. So you head up that way to try to help her out. You find her. She joins the party. Not as a playable character. She, like Final Fantasy 2, we had kind of guest characters come in and out. Here, you still got your 4 characters. And any guests that you have are just kind of following behind you on the world map. But they're not joining you for battles. So we help her. We defeat the djinn. She's able to break the curse. The king, and all of his, happiness for us breaking the curse, grants us I think it's a canoe, and then we also are able to get the airship from Sid, who is also one of the people from the cow. Actually, I believe he's in the village, and he's the airship engineer. You'll find, pretty much starting with the last game, every single Final Fantasy game will have an airship person named Sid, or at least a Sid that's some sort of engineering or mechanical person, something like that. Every entry from this point forward. And so Sid gets you an airship. You guys are able to use the airship to bust through this kind of barrier that kept you from leaving this little area of the world map. The airship's destroyed, but you are able to continue on, and you take Sid to his hometown of Canaan. And then that'll get us to the next portion of the game, which is about having to go try to find the fire crystal and get some more jobs out of that. So after bringing Sid back home, our next path involves trying to walk through this area that you have to be gnome-sized to get to. You have to actually use a spell called Mini to make yourself smaller and go through this path and get to this gnome village and continue on to where you'll end up coming out of near a pirate cave. You'll come out by the pirate cave, you'll go through. The pirates are like, oh, we can't sail the seas because of this horrible sea monster that's out there. So you go to a nearby temple out near the water, and by fighting the monster that's kind of taken over that temple, it makes the sea monster stop, attacking every ship it sees. Pirates are very thankful, so they give you the pirate ship, and now you have a ship to roll around in. There is you're still kind of enclosed. There's a big whirlpool in an area that you can't get through to get out of this kind of almost like a lake area now of the world. But since you have the ship now, you are able to go to this other tower, where by going through there, you can actually make that waterfall go away by defeating whatever it is that's causing the waterfall in that tower. And then you make it up to a cave of dwarfs. And in the dwarf cave has horns of ice, and they have been stolen. Well, actually, first one is stolen. You go after the thief, and while you're dealing with him, he escapes and goes and steals the other one. So he's stolen both of them, and he jumps over into the molten cave, because the reason why he stole these ice horns was to be able to get into this fire cave, which fire cave, fire crystal, you get it. That's where we're heading next. So we go through there, we fight him, we defeat him, we are able to get to the fire crystal, which again grants us some of the power similar to the wind crystal did. And now we have new classes. So the new classes that we can get with the fire crystal, we do have our thief characters back again. And then we have new characters that we haven't seen before called the Ranger and Scholar. And then we also have the Knight character. And if you remember from Final Fantasy I, Knight was kind of the upgraded version of Warrior. So if you've been using a Warrior class at this point in the game, you'd probably want to upgrade them up to a Knight, you know. And then Ranger's a bow and arrow kind of character, and Scholar is interesting one that has one use in this game, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit. But you got new classes, you've saved another crystal, and you return the ice horns to the dwarves, and they are able to kind of put them back where they were at. And as you are kind of celebrating with the dwarves, a citizen from another town in the area comes and says, you know, our town is under attack, please help us. So there's our next destination. So we head down there, and this is the village of Tukul, and we are able to find that they are kind of imprisoned along with their king from the kingdom of Argus, who's nearby. They are able to kind of be entrapped by one of their most trusted kind of sage knights. Kind of decided he wanted more power, and so he's kind of imprisoned everybody. So we fight through, we defeat him, and this is the battle where that Scholar comes in handy, because he can change his weaknesses depending on some sort of barrier shift that he does. So, you know, one time he might be weak to fire spells, and then he'll change, and all of a sudden he's weak to ice spells. And a way that you can know that is that Scholar character has an ability to study an enemy and see what they're weak to. So you would do that, the guy would do a barrier shift, you would do that again, attack with the weakness, and that's how you defeat that bad guy. So little interesting kind of mechanic there that they want to try out. This is really the only real time that Scholar character is tremendously useful. I'm sure you could try to find some other uses for him throughout the game, but really this is the one time that is really specifically made to make that character class useful. So you free Argus, you free his town of Tokul. The king is so happy, he gives you the Wheel of Time, which is a part of an airship that if you take back to Cid, he will upgrade your pirate ship into a pirate ship that can now lift up in the air sometimes. You can only land in water, so it's not quite as freeing as a full airship is, but you are able to go up and fly around some and then, you know, find a different place of water to land in. Pretty much just another way of getting able to go to the next part of the game that was blocked off from you earlier. So that's kind of the fire crystal section, and now that we have an airship, we are flying around, and we realize that if you fly off the edge of the world map here, you don't come around to the other side of it like you would in most games. You end up finding out that your world is a floating little continent on top of this big, gigantic world. And we'll get into that part of the game here in just a little bit. So again, you take the airship off and you realize the world that you've been on is a floating separate continent from the main actual world. What you notice about this world is that it seems to be completely flooded. There's very few, like 3 or 4 different spots where you could possibly land your airship in this giant just water world. And you find a shipwreck, so you land near that and you go in there and you find in there a priestess from the water temple. And her name is Arya, and she's like, can you please help me come to the water temple with me, and we can do this, and it will help lower the water levels. So we join with her. We go down to the water temple. We fight the Kraken down there for the water crystal, because water temple, water crystal. Water crystal gives us new jobs. Water crystal gives us a lot of new jobs, actually. So the water crystal gives us Geomancer, Dragoon, Viking, Black Belt, Dark Knight, Evoker, and Bard. Which, Dragoon is pretty handy to have. There is one enemy, again, similar to how the Scholar really worked for one specific enemy. There is an enemy coming up in the game that the Dragoons are really good for. Black Belt is the upgraded version of the Monk that we got with the Wind Crystal, similar to Final Fantasy I's upgrade system that we had there. Dark Knight is interesting. There's also a cave upcoming that the Dark Knight could be handy too. I'll explain that in a little bit too. I will admit Bard, Evoker, Viking, and Geomancer have not used. Can't tell you a whole lot about them. But those are from what we get from the Water Crystal. Unfortunately, while we're fighting right before we fight the Kraken for the Water Crystal, he takes out Arya, the priestess who led us down here. But she's able to kind of help us get the stuff we need from the Water Crystal, get the water levels to recede, and now we have a whole new world to explore. So we wake up after all the water's receded. There's been kind of the earth quakes and we kind of get knocked out. And that's how when we wake up, the water's receded. We're on land again, but our ship has been chained down for some reason. And we find out that there's a guy nearby. He lives in his name is Goldor. You'll find out why I'm laughing in a second. He lives in Goldor Manor, which is made of gold. Goldor lives in his Goldor Manor. So it's kind of funny, but, and for some reason, he has chained down the heroes. We're not quite sure why, but we go down into the manor, and he fights us because he thinks that we're trying to steal his crystal. He has a crystal, and we're like, oh, that's the next crystal that we need to get, the Earth Crystal. So we fight him, we defeat him, but before he passes, he destroys the Earth Crystal. And we're, oh my god, we lost the crystal. What do we do now? And so that's kind of where we get left off at this portion of the game, and I'm going to tell you about how we take care of that Earth Crystal here in our next section of the game. All right, so cliffhanger, we lost the Earth Crystal. What are we going to do? So we now are able to take our ship again. So we go and we kind of explore around the world trying to see what we can do now. We get shot down over this big kingdom area that we cross over called Sardonia. And we're like, what the heck? We go in and we realize something has happened with the king. He's having half of his people fight the other half of his people. He's got this giant land with like 4 different villages in it. So he's kind of like having a civil war of his own people. While we're looking around, we find the prince. And he's like, I don't know what's going on with my father. This is not like him. Can I join you? And we can go try to talk to my father and see what's up. So we do. We go with him. We go up into the castle. We end up resting there overnight. And the king comes and tries to kill his son while we're there. But he stops himself, and we realize that he has been being controlled by this other force, Garuda. And we end up fighting Garuda, and Garuda is where the Dragoon class comes in handy. So the Dragoons are spear users that their special skill is they jump up in the air and then land on the enemy. And the reason why this is good for that is it works really good against flying enemies, and the Garuda is like a big bird. And also the Garuda has a really nasty attack that if we're up in the air when he does it, it will not hit us. So it kind of saves our characters from getting hit. So we fight him. If you want to you can fight him however you want to, but the easiest way, it really is mechanically made to be really where you would want to try out a Dragoon. So we do so, beat him. The king passes away, but at least he's not under control anymore. The prince takes over, peace restored to that kingdom. Excuse me. And he grants us with a newer airship that doesn't have to land on water anymore. We can land on land now. And so again, that opens up new places that we can visit. And so we use this airship to go down and meet a guy called Doga. And Doga is one of 3 students of the Archmage of this world. His name was Noah. He had 3 students. One was Doga, who we're just now meeting. One is Uni, and then one is Zandy. And we find, and these names might all be mispronounced, but this is how I pronounce them. There's no voice acting in here, so you kind of make up the names as you go. And Doga tells us that Zandy was rebelled against Noah, and he's the cause for a lot of the stuff that we're going on. He's trying to use the crystal's powers to make himself immortal. He does not want to be mortal. He does not want to die. So he's doing all of this to try to extend his life. So Doga sends us to find Uni, his other student, so that the 2 of them can help us with finding the actual Earth Crystal, which Doga tells us was not the crystal that was destroyed by Goldor. That was a fake. And so we actually have a real Earth Crystal to go try to find. And so we go and find Uni, and Uni takes us where we need to go get the Earth Crystal. We go, we find the Earth Crystal. It gives us our newest classes, which are all mage classes this time. So our Black Mage can now become a Magus. Our White Mage can now become a Devout. And then there's a third magic class, and this is the first time in Final Fantasy that we have a Summoner. And summoners you will hear from this point on in Final Fantasy. They'll always be a thing. We'll always have summoned enemies, not summoned enemies, but summoned monsters that we summon to help us in battle. This is the beginnings of it here. So black, white magic, and summon magic we get from this Earth Crystal. So again, similar to FF1, take your white mage, bring him up to Devout, take your black mage, bring him up to Magus. Summoner is unfortunately not that great in this game. You don't have a whole lot of spell uses of the summon spells, so you would run out of magic pretty quickly, but it is the beginnings of a really great character class going forward. And so that's the Earth Crystal part, and really all that's left is to go do the in-game parts, and we'll cover that here in just a second. All right, so we start kind of the in-game proceedings. So we go to Doga and Uni, and they tell us that they have to get us into the Crystal Tower, which will lead us to where Xandy is at. They have to sacrifice themselves. Their spirit somehow will open up the way for us. They do so. We're able to get in the Crystal Tower, and this is where we also have kind of an optional dungeon, per se. Again, you can skip past it and continue on the game, but there are 2 character classes in this optional dungeon that are really great to have. So if you go through this dungeon, it's called Eureka, and you get to the end of it, and it's got, by the time you're through, you'll find a lot of good weapons in there, a lot of good armor, and then you got your 2 classes, which is your Ninja class, which those of us remember from Final Fantasy 1, your Thief would become a Ninja. In this case, Ninja is pretty much your best physical attacking class. So if you've had a Knight, if you've had a Black Belt, if you've had a Thief or Viking or Dragoon, change them into ninjas, because they're fast. They can use every weapon in the game, well, every sword kind of weapon in the game, and can equip some good armor as well. So pretty much your best physical character class. And then Sage is similar on the magic side. They can use the white, black, and summon magics, so you don't have to be locked into one or the other. You don't have to just have a white mage or a black mage. You can have both of your characters or however many characters you want to make mages. Learn all of them. You don't have to do specific single ones. So those are why it's kind of worth going to this side dungeon. So you go through there, you hopefully you get your good weapons, you get your good classes, and now you're ready for the final battle. So you go through the Ancient Maze, you go through the Crystal Tower, and you find Xandy, and you fight, and you defeat him, and you realize that you'll find this happens a lot in the Final Fantasy games, is being controlled by another source. This is the Cloud of Darkness, which is an entity that wants the world to become nothingness, just wants to destroy everything, wants the world to be dark. And so they've been manipulating Xandy to drain the power from the crystals, to be able to stabilize the world and end it for all purposes intended. So at first you fight this Cloud of Darkness, and they whip you. They completely just annihilate you, and you're like, oh man, how are you gonna? I just lost the last boss of the game. What the heck? But then you realize that it's scripted. You're supposed to the first time. And the spirits of Doga and Uni and all of the characters that you've helped throughout the game at this point come, and they help you. They give you their energy, and you resuscitate, and you go and you fight the Cloud of Darkness again, and hopefully you win, because you have to beat the game. And you defeat the Cloud of Darkness, the crystals are saved, the world is saved, and you got your 4 orphans return back to their homeland of on the floating continent that we left. And that's it. That's Final Fantasy 3. So I would say, again, the 3D remaster came out in 2006 on the Nintendo DS. I don't particularly like the aesthetic style of that. They do narratively add a little extra. Your 4 characters actually have names. Lunith, Refia, Ark, and Ignis, I think, are their names. And there's a little bit of backstory to them. I think Ignis is a knight from that first castle that you were at. Refia, I think, is either Cid's understudy or maybe even daughter. She works on airships and stuff. And then Ark and Lunith are our friends, orphan friends from the city of Ur. So there's a little more backstory when it comes to the DS thing. But again, the aesthetic I just am not that big on. So I never actually got entirely through the DS version of Final Fantasy 3. So I did not completely play it until last year, when I played through Final Fantasy 3 for the very first time on the Pixel remaster that came out on my phone. I like it a lot because it's very pared down, and it's a lot like playing the first Final Fantasy, but a little more interchangeable, because not only, you know, Final Fantasy 1, you could pick out of 6 different characters, but then you were locked into those 4 characters as you went. Here, you can mix your classes all you want. You can, you know, you can become a Dragoon for a little bit, Scholar, or Mages. You know, you can do so much tinkering around with it, so it's pretty fun. And I enjoy that one a lot. So it's nice to finally be able to play. It's nice that it finally came into the US. And as we start getting into like legacy of this game, obviously by the time they were doing this, they already knew that Final Fantasy was a machine. It was going to keep on rolling. They're releasing one of these games every year, you know, and the next one, Final Fantasy IV, which would then come into the US as Final Fantasy II, was going to be their first foray on the Super Nintendo system. A lot of big graphics upgrade, big story upgrade. It's a very narrative game, and we will get a lot more into that one on our next week's show. Until then, though, this was Final Fantasy III. A lot of fun. If you are into like just old school turn-based RPGs, this won't be a fun one for you. You don't have to get bogged down in a bunch of cinematic or story. It really is just sit down and play and have a good time. So this kind of will end that. Like Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 are very much in that vein. From Final Fantasy 4 on, we start to get a lot more narrative, a lot more story, and a lot of these stories are really great, as you'll see. So thank you again for watching, and we'll be back next week with Final Fantasy 4/US Final Fantasy 2. Thank you very much for watching.